And that's just going to use my laptop speaker. Or should I use my phone, actually? Hang on.
Sorry.
Yeah, I can use my phone potentially. Well, it's not adding it here.
As a speaker, you know.
Yeah, it's not.
Well, I think audio should work actually. If you have anything we can relate to this, to try that.
It's fine.
Just think audio should work.
Okay.
As long as the audio is turned on here. Yeah, it seems turned on. So.
Okay, I don't need audio. That's great.
Okay. Good. So yeah, hello everyone. Welcome back to this seminar. So pleasure to introduce our speaker today. So our speaker is Professor Duncan Brumby. He's a professor of human-computer interaction at University College London. So Duncan focuses on how people interact with computing technologies. He's a recognized expert in the HCI community. He has published extensively in top venues in HCI. And he also serves as the editor-in-chief of the International Journal of Human Computer Studies, which is one of the top journals of HCI. He has also made significant contributions to HCI education and research, including leadership in postgraduate education at UCL. He has shared his experience globally, including at top universities in industry and industry leaders like Google and Microsoft. So yeah, looking forward to your talk.
Thank you so much. It's really great to be back and see many familiar faces and to see new faces as well. I'm going to be here all afternoon, so more than happy to continue conversations if you'd like to have a chat later. And I think there's also plans as well for dinner this evening. So I don't know what the arrangements are, but Julie is the host for this.
Everyone, join us 10 to 5 at the lobby if you want to come and have some drinks.
Excellent, thank you. So what I want to talk about today is a collection of works that we are presenting at this conference, CHI, that's happening in a few weeks. You may have heard about. So I'm going to tell you about 3 collections of things which are different, but thankfully all form together into a nice cohesive whole. So I think it does kind of work. So there is a paper on using voice user interfaces in the home to get stuff done. I'm going to focus in, we'll talk about this quite briefly. This is the bit I'm going to spend most of my time, which I'm probably most excited about. So our interactions with large language model tools like ChatGPT and some of the potential things that could be going on there. So I'm looking forward to tell you about that. And then finally, I want to tell you about some work we've been doing over a number of years, looking at how people work in the gig economy and some of the challenges in that wonderful dystopian future of work scenario and how we can help people out. So let's talk about voice user interfaces. So I don't know about you, but we've got this family tradition at Christmas. Just left the Easter holidays. So it's good to come back to the Christmas holidays. So Christmas holidays are nice. You bring family members together and you have this kind of intense period of hanging out in the cave all together. And so a nice fun activity, we have the family bake-off. So what we do is divide the family into 2 teams. Often we have relatives visiting from abroad. And we choose a suitable model cake that we aspire to make. So this was this year's target. And then we attempt to deliver it. So this was team 1's effort and team 2. So, you know, I won't say which team I was on, but clearly I think the evidence would point to the winning team, I think, here. But it's quite fun, though, because, you know, getting the kids involved and, you know, involved in cooking and baking and all of this kind of stuff, you've got more time to do that. But yeah, people go to the internet for this, right? So what kind of cake recipe are we going to use? So very quickly, devices are pulled out. The internet is searched to find a recipe. But the thing is, a phone is a terrible device to use while cooking because it's like you've got cake batter and gooey eggs and butter, and then you're like touching your nice glossy, shiny screen. It's just a big mess. So we've been thinking about, not the first people, but one of the scenarios in which voice user interfaces have been applied to is things like cooking at home, because it's you want to have it to be a hands-free, natural interaction where you've just got this device that you can say, hey, like, I want to do this, and now give me the prompts. And like, basically this kind of friend or colleague who's going to stand next to you and help you cook this amazing cake, right? And guide you through that process. There are other reasons to look at cooking as well. I think cooking's I'm from a psychology background, and so there's a long history there in cognitive psychology of looking at routine procedural tasks. So things that kind of have this like nice sequential order. And cooking is a good example of that, where there's often this kind of sense of procedure and things have to be roughly done in sequence. And so we know a lot about this. So what happened in this study? We had a relatively small number of people, only 3 participants, and they were basically given the opportunity to make something. That was the way this study ran. So they were given a list of 6 possible recipes or meals to make. So a mixture of desserts and savory here. And the participant essentially chose these, and it was a great way of recruiting participants. We basically said, well, buy all your ingredients and ship it to you. And I just want to say, this is, in fact, probably the real reason why I'm so happy this work is now published, because it was the one piece of real research we got out during the COVID period. So you might recall all the lockdown requirements that are in place. And during that period, I had a load of students I was working with, and it was so many online Zoom interviews. I mean, that's all you could do. You know, tell me about this, tell me about that. There's nothing wrong with that side, but it just became a bit samey. It was very difficult to do kind of more, you know, in situ work. And so I think this study was a real standout during that period, where the student worked very hard to think about how to run a study in person in a COVID secure way. So what happened is our participants were recruited, and they selected what they wanted to cook, and they basically got an Ocado delivery to their door. And we also then kind of like delivered the technology, knocked and ran away. And then they opened all this up, and they basically got a great surprise. They installed it in their kitchen, set the cameras up, and basically filmed themselves. So with no researcher present, they set it up, their space, and filmed themselves at home. We've done a lot of work in the home as well, and it is really tricky because you've got lots of ethics and who's being caught. And so I think it was quite nice to let the participant have quite a lot of control over that. And then obviously they got to review the video data before they went and shared it back to us. But essentially what we asked them to do was to film themselves cooking. Then we were able to do analysis on those interactions. But honestly, this is the reason I'm most excited about this work, is that it was a really quite a good, fun way of doing stuff, given the constraints that existed at the time. In terms of the results, I mean, there's a few things I just want to pick out. It's just a really light touch summary of the results here. So one of the things that kind of came up here is, you know, you've got this, you're working with your voice assistant, this kind of partnership. We're doing this task together, and you're like, hey, what's next? And it's like, hey, you've got a meeting at 11:30. It's like completely missing the mark. So, you know, you could say that these things are geared towards certain things, and they kind of like failed to grasp that we're doing this thing. And the key word that's being used here is pulling it out, and it's kind of latching into it's outside of the task. So that seems like a problem. There's a couple more problems. This one's quite fun. So I won't read it all through here. I'll leave you to kind of skim through this transcript. But essentially what's happening is our participant is just, the device isn't able to understand their accent or what they said. And so they just start getting closer and closer to the device, speaking more and more slowly and clearly. Maybe this time you'll hear it. So it's this kind of like dance, if you like, of repairing, getting it to try and understand what's being said. And it's very kind of like convoluted. This kind of like dance is being taken place here. And then, oh yeah, as I said earlier, we've got this long-standing interest from cognitive psychology research about how people maintain their position in a task. And it's really hard. There's some deep work that's been done in that space. And it's no great surprise that these devices get it wrong. So one of the ways in which it gets it wrong is just basically giving you too much. So when it doesn't tell you about the meeting, it doesn't actually tell you what's next. It just simply tells you too much. So here you've got like a whole collection of too many steps all being delivered at once. So it's not being broken up into an adequate sized chunk, if you like. Of course, you could say, when I talked about this work before, some people reflect on, well, whose job is it, right, to create this content? We use commercially available products, and we use commercially available, found recipes that will run through these things. And the question is, whose responsibility is it to kind of design the content here? But I think what we're doing here is highlighting, if you like, little areas where these things just aren't working well for what they're intended to do. which is to help people do daily tasks and giving them information in a way that's kind of manageable and easy for them to understand. That was the first half of it. There is a second part to the paper done by the folks up at Stockholm, where they did a Wizard of Oz with a new interface, if you like, to make things better. But I'm not going to talk about that because I know less about that work. I've talked about the work that we kind of ran at UCL. But I think it just highlights some misunderstandings here and lack of, well, difficulties, if you like, in how far away we are from having natural conversations with these kind of interfaces. And that leads me, if you like, into the second part of this talk, which is to look at ChatGPT, which is, again, I think what we're seeing here is this big thrust towards having natural conversations where you either speaking to a voice interface or typing it into like a ChatGPT interface, like help me draft that email asking for a reference letter. We were just talking about reference letters over lunch. And this paper was inspired by some emails that some of us had received. Here's a video that we made for Kai, and it was quite fun. You can watch this video, it's up on YouTube. So it was done in the format of a little interview where we all had a little chat on Zoom, the free authors. But I'll give you a quick summary of it here. And so it kind of started out with some of us receiving emails. Have you received emails like this? You? Yeah? I've certainly received an email like this, where somebody has clearly used ChatGPT to draft a request, but then failed to check and insert your name correctly. And honestly, I mean, so the starting point here is not to say that there's nothing wrong with this, right? I personally don't think there's anything wrong with using ChatGPT to get tasks like this done. It's very good for like, help me draft a reference letter or help me make a request for somebody to write me a reference letter. It's going to give you that kind of template response very well. So I think these tools got great potential to help with some of these routine tasks, particularly writing certain forms of communication. But the focus here, because it's kind of done all this heavy lifting for you and produced lots of text, how do you then do this final check of making sure that you're paying attention? And if we just jump back to this slide here, of course, the interface on ChatGPT does have this little disclaimer. ChatGPT can make mistakes, consider checking important information. But I think that's more heavily focused on to this concern around hallucinations. One of the big concerns, if you say ChatGPT, write me a lit review on HCI, it's just going to make up a load of references, right? We know this. And I think that's what the big focus has been on here, is actually just making stuff up or being factually incorrect. I think we've got a much more basic concern with the interaction here, which is actually that, no, check what it's written for you. Actually move your eyes over it and then play a different role. Instead of being author where you're typing the words, you're instead now being like the supervisor who's reviewing content and making small corrections. So, the starting point to this, of course, is like and this is why I think HCI is interesting. So HCI is going to be constantly interesting because it's people using technology. People don't change, but the technology does. And design choices are made. So the people that made ChatGPT made a choice here. They could have made this more apparent, right? They could change the font, put a big different color on it. They could give you more indicators to help you, like visual attention, make it pop out, if you like, rather than just these little square brackets that you can look for. I'm sorry, if you're going for a CS solution, you could also just write a script that could look for the square brackets in your emails before you hit send, right? And say, maybe you should correct those. But it doesn't stop there. So anyone who's still on Twitter or X, this broke a few weeks ago, about 3 weeks ago. Do you know this story? So this was a paper that was published. It's still up on Science Director. It was a few weeks ago. They're probably taking it down now. But you get to the general discussion of the paper, and it's in summary. I'm very sorry, but I don't have access to real-time information or patient-specific data as I am AI. Now, clearly, just to add, of course, this isn't actually highlighted in the actual paper. It's just in the text, right? So what's happened? The authors have clearly used ChatGPT as a writing tool to help themselves write their conclusion. They did a copy and paste job. And sure, the text beneath it was all good, but they just forgot to remove that top bit. They submitted it. The reviewers didn't spot it. The editor didn't spot it. The proof editors didn't spot it. and it sits up there. And after this broke, it was a great week. This was like a Friday night fun watching. It actually made Twitter interesting again for a moment. But academics were diving into and finding all these other papers that have other tells that clearly people who've used ChatGPT have not spotted it. And so this is is it a growing product? I don't know. It's clearly something that's going to sneak through more and more as these tools are used by people, right? It's a clear indicator that they're being used and they're not being spotted in their use. So the question we've been thinking about is how to encourage this checking behavior. Checking is optional, right? When you go to the bar and they say it's going to be this much, and now you just simply put your card or your phone and just tap, right? Do you actually look to see that the numbers are exactly what you expect, or do you just have trust, right? So there's a lot of trust in our interaction. All of our interactions with technology have been built to be faster and faster and faster, more and more mindless, if you like. You think about some of the stuff that Daniel Kahneman talked about with the kind of thinking fast, thinking slow. A lot of it's been designed to move us into a faster interaction paradigm, so we don't do the checking. So how to kind of slow things down and encourage more thoughtful, reflective, optional checking behavior, if you like. So one place to look is questionnaires. Questionnaires have been used for a long time as a research method. And one thing that's used in questionnaires is attention checks. So an attention check is set up at the beginning of a questionnaire when you read the instructions. And it says, on some of these questions, you might see pizza as a response option. Whenever you see pizza, select it. Ignore whatever else might be. So you get to a question like this, which of the following is a vegetable? And you suspend your sense of reality and you click pizza, right? And if you don't click pizza, then you're not paying attention. You didn't follow the instruction. So this provides a cheap and easy way for a researcher to see whether the person's following the instructions as intended. So we imagine this paper is a design fiction. It's an essay. Didn't actually do anything. We just imagined the future. We imagine something like this, where you're writing an email to your boss. And, dear boss, hope this message finds you well. I wanted to take a moment to extend my heartfelt thanks for incredible support today. Your understanding and guidance were immensely so ChatGPT, isn't it? Immensely helpful. Oh, and by the way, please accept my immediate resignation, right? So we just imagine sneaking in these little bits of, these embarrassing things. We're going to, as I said, it's a design fiction. We imagine giving you what you want, but also inserting things that will embarrass you, that will encourage you to check so that you don't make silly mistakes by not actually reading what's been written for you before you hit copy, paste, send. And so, yeah, we thought about this as well. Like, this is a CHI paper from back in 21. And it's really hard to unsay things. Even when the option exists, people don't tend to use it, on WhatsApp. You tend not to delete. And even when you do, it's just super awkward. It just brings so much attention. So unsaying things in digital technology is very hard. The record is always there. So that's the kind of idea anyway, is how to encourage checking by potentially embarrassing people. I just want to do a little handbrake turn here and to think a little bit about scenarios where these writing tools are particularly useful. So yeah, Mohammed, you mentioned at the beginning, thank you, about the editor-in-chief role at IGHCS. So I spent a lot of time looking at peer review process, thinking about it and managing it and the challenges. And it's probably the same, it's across the board. CHI had record number of submissions this year. Everything's on a 20% increase in submissions, right, at least. More and more work, fewer and fewer people available to do that work. With higher and higher expectations for rapid turnaround. So we're absolutely drowning in this stuff. And I think it's really interesting to think about how these writing tools are going to be used in scientific publication processes, both for the production of work. So are we going to see this rapid increase in suddenly the amount of content that people are able to write? We're talking about grants and all these documents that are required for grants. Suddenly ChatGPT can just make them for you, right? So it makes it easier and faster for you to turn these things over. I think there's some evidence, I'm seeing evidence, the editor of more and more submissions coming in as it's helping people write faster and faster. So they're able to turn stuff. And that's before you even get into the situation of like synthetic data and all of that stuff. And I'll leave that for the time being, just post that on the side. But I think there are some questions there around the peer review process and how researchers are going to use these tools to help them write reviews. And I want to be really clear, I'm not talking about copying and pasting the text of a paper into ChatGPT and saying, hey, review this for me, because I personally feel that's a no-no. I'm thinking more of the scenario where you have read a paper and you spent an hour or so reading it, you've written some notes, and then you want to expand those notes. I mean, you could just send those notes to the author, be like, this paper's okay, this is okay, maybe this book. Some people do that, and those notes are often quite harsh, and they often upset authors, particularly if early career researchers, maybe it's their first submission, they get these quite blunt, harshly written notes. Instead, could we think about how these tools can be used to expand those notes into something that's more constructive, potentially? Thinking back to the paper, though, we submitted, so we put it into AltCai, and I'm so sad to see AltCai is potentially going to be lost in the future. I do like this track. So AltCai gets away around this, so it does open peer review, which is quite nice. And so we had a lot of fun with this because we know reviewing is hard work. So in the paper itself, we actually put review templates in. So, we don't want our author, we know reviewing is hard work. We don't want people to spend too much time on it. So we actually gave our authors, just copy and paste this over if you like it or you hate the paper. But of course, in true tongue-in-cheek form, we inserted the attention check. So, all about the spaghetti cooking techniques, optimization of spaghetti cooking techniques. So obviously it made no sense to the paper. I mean, it could be an AltCai paper, but it wasn't relevant to our paper. But I think there is something here, though. So this is taken from Elsevier's web. So the journal that I'm running, they've got this big disclaimer saying don't use it. And I think that's the question, I think. I think there's an interesting space here to think about certain writing tasks. And I do think the peer review is a constrained writing task where you have notes that you then want to convert into more shareable text. And what are the concerns around there? There's all sorts of issues potentially around privacy, sharing your kind of thoughts with these platforms that might then eat them up and then use them. All these lawyers are being told off for this at the moment, right? Using ChatGPT at work and then being fired because they're sharing and giving away trade secrets. Is there going to be similar concerns here when we start sharing our thoughts about research papers? If you're interested in this topic, we've got a conversation that we're having, if you like, at the CHI Work conference. This is happening in Newcastle. If you've not been, CHI Work is in its third year. I think it's quite a small community conference, about 100 people. So it's happening down the road in Newcastle at the end of June. Really nice little conference. So there'll be lots of topics around this kind of future of work scenario. But we're going to have a conversation around the use of AI writing tools in peer review, thinking about how that can be used. And I don't think this is just one concern with this is that you could say, oh, this is just an academic just doing some like navel gazing on their own concerns. But I don't think so. I mean, what we saw with COVID was the need for accurate, fast peer review processes. Climate change research needs to have accurate, fast peer review processes. And I think there's evidence, like I showed you with that paper, with that statement in there that was included, is that the reality is our peer review processes are under strain. And we put a lot of faith in them to do science and engineering well, right? And if they're being strained because everyone's overproducing and undervaluing review work, that's going to be a real problem. So I think we need to get on top of this for the sake of a lot of things. Anyway, I'm going to change tack one last time. This is now going to go into looking for work. So this is a journal paper. Sometimes it's like putting the track in front of the rushing train. So this is work that was led by Laura Laskow, who's a PhD student working with Anna, Sandy, and me at UCL, and recently finished, or last year. And this was the big journal paper based on a collection of studies that Laura had ran. And there was a big focus here on gig economy work as an example of one example of the future of work, right? So the gig economy are these internet-based platforms where you don't have a traditional contract. You're signing on and just doing piecemeal work, just-in-time work, either doing some deliveries, renting your apartment, or driving, being a taxi driver, so on and so forth. And so they're often characterized as low-paid jobs, with the idea that anyone can sign on and earn a few pounds doing this service, essentially. We focused in on Amazon Mechanical Turks. This is a platform that's been around for a long time. Connection to AI there is, of course, AMT started as a platform where people could put up their data to get human labels on it, right? So if you want people, what do people think of this? So you can then train your models. This is where AMT started as a human getting people to label stuff. But very quickly from that point, it got taken forward and used by researchers. Sure you've all used it potentially as a research platform to recruit participants. So for people that do research with human participants, AMT is a great platform to get a large number of people for relatively low cost, quite quickly at any time, get people to complete your task. And we started doing that. There's a series of studies that we ran where we used AMT participants, and not just because they were easy and convenient, but because it actually afforded some really nice opportunities to do some novel work. So Sandy's research used AMT researchers because they were working in a naturalistic environment, as in not in the lab. So he was interested in self-interruptions. And it was very clear that people on these platforms were multitasking all the time. They were constantly doing more than one thing. And so that provided us a great opportunity to look at interruptions and multitasking behavior in a more naturalistic but controlled setting, if you like. That work kind of got taken forward by Laura to think more deeply and understand more deeply the working context of these people. And so that's what this paper describes. It's looking at days in the life, if you like, of people working on these platforms. So we recruited people that worked full-time on AMT, so they got most of their money, and it was very low income as well. We're talking $8,000 a year working full-time on these platforms. But it was convenient, right? Very convenient. And it was also what was available. So there was benefits to the people working on these platforms. So there's two studies reported. The first one is a time of use diary study. And this is a larger sample of people saying, how do you intend to work for the week? And the short answer there is Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. But that wasn't always possible. Even though they wanted to do that, it wasn't always possible because work wasn't always available when they wanted to work. So they had to delay and defer until other times of the day when tasks were available. So they weren't able to get done what they wanted to get done. The second study, which I'm going to tell you about here, was a more in-depth look of 90 minutes, just 90 minutes of intense work. So participants were asked to, it was advertised on AMT as another job. And they were basically told the way this job works is that you film yourself for 90 minutes, film your screen while you're doing other jobs, and then review your video and send it back to us and we'll analyze it. And what we found here is that very little of this time was actually spent working. So of a typical 90 minutes, only about a third of that time was spent actively doing other tasks that got them paid. And there was a lot of other time being spent doing internal admin, right? The platform required, or just simply waiting or looking for work. So it's not very productive. But of course, this is bad for people that work on these kind of platforms because you're only getting paid when you're on the clock. So there is no, the slack thinking time is not being paid, right? So that's a problem for the people here. It gets more interesting, I think, when you start looking about how this all unfolds over time. So I've just got a couple of these screenshots here. So here you've got somebody working and they've got they've got multiple tabs open. And in the tabs, they've got various tools. They're using scripts to alert them. So they might be working a job, but then they've got a script that's constantly looking at the available new jobs and trying to find high value work because you want to grab it really quickly. So you're trying to pounce on good stuff. So we're watching people configure these tools, manage these tools, set them up, change the parameters on them, and then also respond to alerts. And you saw, in our video data, you see examples of this where they're working on a task, get halfway through it, and then bam, you're getting suddenly this opportunity, which is going to pay you 10 times more. So of course you drop instantly what you're currently doing, jump on the new bandwagon and start working on that because all these things, it's competitive, right? If you don't grab it, somebody else is going to grab it. And they've got all sorts of time constraints on it as well. I'll get to that in a moment. But what's happening here is the person's responding to this alert and then starting a new job. And the trouble is, it doesn't work out. And this really is the point that Laura made throughout her PhD work. And there was also a Chi late breaking work paper as well that was presented at Chi New Orleans at 22. And it's the design of these platforms. Again, why is this a HEI project? It's because it's looking at design choices and the consequences of design choices. So AMT as a platform encourages people who post jobs to set all these time parameters or time constraints. You know, participants must have only got 1 hour to complete the task from the point they start it. And it's sold to the person who's advertising, this is good. This means you get good, diligent participants. But actually, the reality is for our poor workers, it's not good at all because they're spinning multiple plates here. And of course, you could get into the realm of like, well, should they be doing that? The reality is they have to, because this isn't a well-paid work environment. They have to be doing more than one thing at once and constantly interleaving different tasks. And I think if we're in that position, we'd be doing the same thing, right? It's entirely rational. But the trouble is those time constraint parameters, which the platform encourages people to put in place, puts our participants into an impossible position where they're constantly racing against the clock, hence the title of the paper. And so you get this situation here where they jump between tasks, get back, do most of the work, almost all done, but then simply run out of time, and then it's a zero-sum game. They lose all the money, right, if they don't get it completed on time. So it's an interesting paper. So we've got these two things and looking at a deep dive on the design of these platforms and what it means to work on them and some of the implication of some of the design choices in them. I think this is topical and timely and interesting because, of course, you might say, well, it's just AMT workers. That's just a niche part of work. But I think what we've learned, coming back to what's happened since COVID, is all the working from home, right? Working from home is massively flexible, allows for flexible working arrangements. But one of the things that we also saw from this is very rapidly the amount of observation or surveillance which is being taken forth here by companies is really, it's out of control now, right? So here's a focus in on teams, but universities, we still haven't got that far yet. They harass us to do our training, but they're not yet logging our every keystroke. But I think if you work for a big tech company, your laptop is heavily monitored, right? So interactions are being monitored here. And I think what we're seeing here is just how that can kind of, again, the design choices there that are being made can have unintended consequences if you're not careful. So I think it's kind of interesting to think about that as more and more work goes online. And you can look at places like AMT as possible ways in which other work could go with where you get to this kind of level of control and surveillance. So yeah, hopefully some, very different things, hopefully interesting, or at least those different things that got you thinking. So cooking, and navigating tasks with a voice interface, using ChatGPT, the types of tasks it's going to be useful for, not useful for, and encouraging error checking, and then working away into the future with a surveillance culture and what that means for how we get stuff done and monitoring and all of that good stuff. Really like to fact, no research is done in isolation, so really great colleagues here, particularly happy with this paper here, really bringing together two separate groups here, where Ben Cower did this magic matchmaking between the UCL and Stockholm teams, which was really nice to see. And then obviously Anna and Sandy work with no end. So yeah, with that, thank you very much. Gladly take any questions you have.
So I'm old enough to remember communication before the internet, right? So we used to exchange letters, written, etc., and so on. And then we passed through emails, and nowadays even chat, etc. And one big change is that we became much more tolerant about misspellings, about not formulated maybe fully clearly. But I mean, in exchange of communication that was much more efficient, fast, etc., it lowered to a certain extent the standard of written communication. So going back to your first study, is the one about interaction with the digital assistant or ChatGPT, don't you think we are just at the beginning and maybe we are just going to adjust to all these things that we find funny for the moment, but in exchange of efficiency, we are going to accept it at the end.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's why it's why we had a lot of fun writing this paper, imagining what it is to communicate, how and when you would choose to, it's not clear, for instance, at the moment, if you obviously get an email from like a close colleague that's clearly been ChatGPT, do you then feel, why are you ChatGPT me? I don't think does that exist as a phrase yet? I've been ChatGPT'd. I'm not sure. It should do. I feel it should do, right? Like, why are you doing that to me, right? We're good friends. You should just be able to write bluntly. But yeah, I think it is. My hunch would be that at the moment it's used for this kind of more formal stuff, like reference, and that's what it's quite good at, right? It really is quite good at this stuff, which is like really boilerplate, standard rejection letters, acceptance letters, references, stuff that's just generic, right? But yeah, I think, but then you're right. Then the guardrails come off, and then you might go back to just writing shorthand. But I think that's the beginning of a journey, right? And obviously there's stuff in the popular press, isn't there, about this people who aren't very good at writing, who are then able to use it to then ask for things better and this kind of stuff. So it will be interesting to see how it plays out. But yeah, I think it's super exciting, right? But yeah, it is. I think it does lead to deep questions about why it is in certain contexts and settings we do require this longhand formal version, right? Which is quite verbose and padded, right? But yeah, thank you.
It was more just thinking about this. I think it also has an effect on then how people use it without, if they use it initially with ChatGPT. So especially like people who are learning to do things the first time, they see the way that it's done. And then I've noticed that some of these phrases are now in the shorthand writing. It has a sort of leakage effect across that now I see people using phrases everywhere, even though I know it's them who necessarily typed it. So I don't think it's just no longer ChatGPT or not.
But isn't this sign that like it's kind of doing what we do anyway when we learn? I mean, I still have distinct memories of like starting university and like learning to transition from like A-level writing to like writing like more academic, that thing where people say academic writing, and I still have vivid memories of that journey. And I think it really came down to writing a lot. I did a psychology background degree, so lots of essays and lots of reading. And you kind of like, you pick up these turns of phrases, right, that you never spoke growing up, but you suddenly adopt, right? And that's the advice that when we get, certainly when new students ask me, like, how do I get my writing better? It's like, just read a lot and practice writing and just go. But it's exactly what, as you said, this is exactly what ChatGPT, you start parroting, right? You just simply parrot, and eventually you absorb and you make it your own, and you start learning how it's used. But was that your question? Was it more that ChatGPT just has its tells as well, which is also kind of interesting?
Yeah, I think it's kind of, the tells are becoming less easy to spot because it's becoming part of people's ordinary.
Yeah, it's very cheery though, isn't it? That's really ChatGPT. Whenever it writes stuff, it's always so cheery and supportive. Sometimes I go with the kind of go for a British academic style and kind of tone it down a little bit. Be a bit. Is that
Yeah, so you explicitly mentioned that you use ChatGPT for your abstract in the talk.
Yes.
And I was wondering if it helps that we are open with communicating that it was used in some way, maybe specifically saying which way.
Yeah, I think we're still setting up those norms, aren't we? I mean, what is it? So like, I think a lot of the publishing stuff say you should acknowledge, so you shouldn't be putting it as a co-author, but you should be putting in the acknowledgements, and there's all these kind of boilerplate texts. But yeah, I don't think it gives you a sense of how much it was used and in what way. I mean, I've been using it quite a lot this past year, and I personally find it really quite fun, actually. It's been really, I find it's good because it does feel like a just-in-time colleague who's kind of giving you that instantaneous feedback, and you can kind of have that very rapid kind of bouncing. It's not single shot, right? It just simply speeds up that process. You can also play out different scenarios as well very rapidly. But yeah, I don't think we've kind of got to a way of describing, whether you just said make this one sentence better and just took the first thing it said, or whether you actually did this iterative multi-attempt refinement. Yeah, because I think that's a big difference, right? So I said to my students they could use it for their assignments this year. You see, I've got these different policies. In fact, last year we were behind the curve. This year we're on top of it a bit more. And yeah, it was interesting to see that clearly people had used ChatGPT, but it wasn't necessarily making their stuff any better, right? And I think that's interesting as well, because I don't think it's going to magically, make all this concern that, students will get first because they'll just use this. It's not quite there yet, I don't think. Maybe it will be in the next version, but not in this version. But yeah, I think it all comes down to still having the human author still has a very active role here. And I think expressing that in the descriptor, as you say, is how it was used in a kind of like a deep way versus a kind of just very superficial, just write me something and I'm just going to take it and never read it. There's a big gulf between those two instances, I think, for sure. Yeah.
Speaking of different classes and different policies around generative AI use, I was very surprised to find that you also sometimes instruct students to use generative AI and then reflect on the use of it. And I found that really interesting.
I think I know the one you mean. Yeah, we can talk more about that offline, I think, potentially. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's kind of getting ahead of the technology, isn't it? I mean, that's whenever you see new technology come along, there's kind of two reactions. One is, go back to that image here, right? One is just to kind of is to ban it, but it never works. Which, if you made something good that's useful, you're never going to stop it, right? So it exists in the world. People will find a way of using it. And especially there's all the evidence suggests it's hard to spot as well. So you're fighting a losing battle. So I think getting ahead of that and developing these skills and using these tools, because I actually think, going back to the previous point, I think there is a big learning curve on how that. I don't think it's that straightforward that you say, write me. Like I actually did that with my students this year. I gave them a ChatGPT essay. We did this peer marking activity. And it was mark these previous students' essays, and I threw in a ChatGPT generated one, and they hammered it. They gave it the lowest score, and I say, which one of these is a ChatGPT? Do you know which one? And they all said, yeah, that one. So they know. We all know. It's like, it's not this magic thing, but I think there is skill in using these tools, and I think it's important that people get up to speed on those. Of course, it's going to constantly evolve, but HI, we've got to be on top of that. So yeah. Oh.
Yeah, so I mean, because I do believe there are good ways of using it, and that if you draft a paper and then ask for critique, you might be like, oh, this topic, and that's a good one or something. But I think it's like supermarket pizzas and microwave food. You're going to end up eating crap and feeling like shit afterwards. And the same sort of thing is happening with ChatGPT, because you start, even if with the best intentions, you think, oh, I'm going to do the work and get it to critique me. It becomes easier and easier to use early in the process, and then it's also highlighting how many of our systems. So that journal paper that had on the front page, blatant signs of cheating had not been picked up. So that entire journal is basically crap. Editors should be fired. Reviewers should be fired. It's crap. But people are, it's highlighting major problems in our system the same way that if a student can get a good mark on our exams, it's highlighting issues with our exams. And we've seen massive problems here with students cheating with this stuff. And it's kind of highlighting where we're accepting crappy answers because there's a big overlap between ChatGPT and mediocre undergrad.
Yeah, well, I think a situation like this happening, I would go that. It's the authors that have to take responsibility, I think.
The authors have to take responsibility. Everybody else in that pipeline has to take it. They have not read the paper.
But I think this is so. One of the things I shared this the video here. So one of the things that Anna says in this video you can see on YouTube is that why does this happen? Is we kind of start riffing on this point here. So the question is, how does this happen? Which is a bit like the paper as well. How did this come to be? And I think she made a good point, which is that you're focusing in on this bit, right? And so it's all about attentional focus. You focus in on this bit, and then you miss that bit. And I think the same thing could easily happen here. This could easily have happened on revision number 3. I see a scenario where this happened on revision number 3. And the editors probably, the reviewers may not have, I mean, who knows? I can't speak with any authority of what actually happened here. But you can imagine a scenario where just one thing was being checked, and maybe the authors did further changes to something else, which then nobody then checked again. So there's all sorts of situations where it all comes down to that kind of attentional focus there, doesn't it? Right. But then again, it's
so one of the issues is also an education thing. So there are lots of issues. So we now, we get lots of applications from countries where people don't have English as a first language. And when we now get these ChatGPT things, it's actually a big negative.
Yeah.
Because you have now no idea how, what the quality of English is, and the fact that they need to use ChatGPT as a warning sign. And so I think people are using it in ways that they think are going to be advantageous.
Yeah. Well, I think this, again, this is one of these things I've heard anecdotally, and it's one of these results that's been talked about a lot. It's one of these highly cited results. It's probably not even correct, but it sounds too good to be true. But it goes something like that. The author thinks that I said the same thing. Here's my version A that I wrote, and here's version 2 that was then ChatGPT reconstructed. I think version 2 that ChatGPT is better. But actually, if I give it to you, you think the one that I wrote is actually better. So there's this kind of sense of I'm not sure. It sounds almost too good to be true. I'd like to see the paper on what that was done by. But it seems like a good story, and it seems plausible as well. That kind of like maybe we don't have good feelings of what's good, right? Certainly, I think one of the things that's really very different about ChatGPT is just how it reconstructs stuff. I mean, that's what's so cool about it, is that you give it those notes. And it's not just doing these word by word, like kind of something word by word, sentence by sentence, but it's actually reconstructing the entire thing to still have the same meaning, but in a very different way. So you end up reading it like, oh, it reads brand new, right? So you kind of get that sense of newness, which is quite fun. Anyway.
Yeah, so the thing is somewhat ChatGPT and similar, let's say, is type of instrument that makes the smart smarter and dumb dumber. So if you know what you have to write, so that you really know the content, it will help you to make it faster.
But I think there is going to be, so again, going back to the stuff that I'm hearing about, kind of, there's like, again, this is kind of like pop psychology kind of research, but there's been some study that suggests that, I think it was done in a consultancy where they looked at, and they said it the other way around, that for the really good, it just made them a tiny bit better, but it actually brought the bottom people up. So what you're suggesting is the top fly and the bottom crash further down. There is another argument that says more of this kind of step change. So I think I'm sure we'll get greater clarity over the next 5 years on that, right? As more and more studies are run on how these tools help support, whether it be people applying to programs or doing their job, right? Helps, and then you get into the whole thing of overworking, right? Just makes everything go. We just great. All we're going to do here is just make everything run faster, right? Just turn the speed up on the fairground ride even faster. More papers, more reviewing, more, right? Already the system's kind of crumbling down a little bit with too much work, but that's for the future, I suppose. Okay.
Just another example of somewhere where it's not, it was being used, but Steve was there as well. We were having a workshop in Abu Dhabi about the future of HCI and AI, and there was just there from a major US company that sells word processing software, and we're incorporating large language models into it. And as part of the meeting, she kind of got it to generate our brain dump via ChatGPT or the equivalent. Actually, this is not, that's the exact opposite of when it's a good idea to use it, because it's going to be converging to lots of already accepted ideas. When you're actually doing a brainstorming, you want to actually involve things which are summarizing to the norm or to the mean less. And so I think it's even experts are using it in ways that I think counterproductive.
As I say, it's pretty much free, and the business model for these big companies is just like hitting the wall. So it's going to change a lot when you're going to be charged whatever it is, $1, $10 per request to ChatGPT. Even if you're just getting back the cost of which I saw some kind of number recently for how much energy an individual query is, and it's not trivial, right? That's quite a lot. So just now, there's a very different thing here, that just now these things are essentially free because they're trying to hook the marketplace into taking on something you don't really need or want. And then once we're hooked, then they'll start charging us. And try and do that before all the lawsuits hit them because of all the material they've used, which was copyright, to create the models, and before the FTC kicks their arse. So whatever you do just now in terms of research may not reflect what's going to happen in a couple of years' time, when I really hope most of these companies are destroyed by the courts.
This is a limited point in time then, potentially.
I think it is. I mean, there's a certain, it's a continual market process of like you get something out there for relatively cheaply.
Yeah.
And build up the market, get people used to it, and then they may be willing to pay for it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
if the cost is too high,
they'll make the models more efficient and the will be cheaper too.
We're having a conversation like this yesterday about these low-cost buses which have started appearing again. You can get between cities and stuff. And I was like, oh, this is feeling so retro. I feel like we're back in 2000 again with Megabus. It's like, the same business idea reinvented again 20 years later. It failed then for a reason, right? But for some reason, they think now it's going to catch on, right?
It's interesting that you mentioned this analogy of buses, because that's exactly what I want to ask about. A lot of the arguments I hear about, like, the drawbacks of getting used to tools like ChatGPT and so on, remind me so much of the use of calculators when we were kids. Like, people will say, oh, you're going to forget all about math once you start getting using calculators. A lot of people who use calculators ended up being, mathematicians and stuff. And also, we noticed this a lot in research, HCI as well. Like, there were hypes about VR and AR like some decades ago, and then it became quiet, and then it's hyped again, and same for conversational agents and stuff. What do you think are the closest analogies to tools like that help us in connectivity, like ChatGPT, from previous years, from like previous technologies, or things that we could learn from?
Well, they are a tool. I mean, it's just the same thing as a tool, isn't it? I mean, it's a tool that helps you, like in the same way that the word process, helps you with your whatever aspect of the task, but you still need to know how to do the task, right? And I suppose that's a bit, some of these claims about the kind of bringing this thing about whether you bring people up or for those that don't know how to, I don't know if you ever received an email from like people that don't know how to use emails. It's quite fun. They don't include any subject line and that kind of stuff. And it's written like a text message. And it's like, yeah, maybe that might have helped them draft an email that looks more like an email, phrasing things a bit better. But yeah, I do think these are just tools that help at the moment, can be helpful to those that already know what they're doing. It just makes things more efficient,
but
right?
I think that sometimes because I mean, in HCI, we always say it's important that the interface is as transparent as possible.
Yeah.
When we talk about emails, for example, the aim here is to communicate, right? So ideally, if it's out of yours, just have an idea and it goes to you with as less friction as possible. Are we like insisting too much on standards that maybe they're not really, it's just because this is how we used to do things, and rather than that this is actually something that is needed?
Good. Yeah, let's talk more about this afterwards. Yeah, I don't have an immediate reaction. So yeah, that's good.
There's a ChatGPT cartoon where there's somebody saying, I can take this list of bullet points and turn it into an email. And then the guy on the other side saying, oh, I've got this ChatGPT thing that takes an email and turns it into an email.
Yeah. Well, yeah, there is this kind of dance. I take my thoughts, expand them out, send it to you, and then you take the long email and summarize it down. It is very good for that kind of stuff. Those long emails that like you might get from like, say, a university president. Just distill it down, right? 2 bullet points.
Trying to just
what do you think the subtext might be? Yeah, exactly. Good. But I think there's potential. Also, getting I encourage my students now increasingly to put their reviews through as well, just so they can then read them in a more constructive way as well. Because again, receiving reviews can, I think, still be quite a tough job sometimes. So sometimes it's getting a more of a kind of like the condensed summary, right? What should I do with this? Right? Would be useful. So I think there are other edge cases, right, where it can be used. Anyway, thank you so much. Really good conversation. As I said, I'll be around all afternoon, so we'll have to continue having chat with anyone. Thanks.